People always ask me, Eric, what do you think NASCAR needs to do to reinvigorate fans and bring new fans back into the sport? What do you think they need to do? And I give a multitude of answers. I've gone over them in different episodes of Out of the Groove just from this season, from the last few weeks. I've given a few different opinions, but there's one opinion that I've stuck by and I think is the biggest thing NASCAR needs to change. And unfortunately for NASCAR, it's kind of out of their control. It's no secret, NASCAR's TV ratings and ticket sales have kind of slowly declined since the mid to late 2000s, but more recently, the last couple of years, we've seen a slightly more exaggerated dip in viewers. And people like to blame a multitude of things, whether it be Brian France introducing the playoffs or the chase way back in 2003, to all those changing formulas, to the race cars being more aero-dependent and the racing not being as close as it was in the early 2000s. There's a lot of different varying opinions as to why NASCAR isn't as powerful in the sports world as it was 15, 20 years ago. But if you ask me, not enough people are considering the obvious as a real reason, a real explanation as to why viewership has declined recently. I believe that these young drivers that we have coming up into the sport the last couple of years, that we've hyped up a ton this season, I believe they are the ones most responsible for killing NASCAR and hurting its viewership in recent years. And I'm gonna tell you exactly why I believe that. How's it going, everybody? My name is Eric and welcome to a more formal episode of Out of the Groove. Each week on here I upload multiple videos talking about the racing that we see week to week, but this episode today I want to take a step back and take a really in-depth look at NASCAR as a whole the last few years, and I want to make some comparisons, and I want to, like I said, kind of give you my point of view as to what's really hurting NASCAR's ratings the last several years. And before I get into these young drivers and start giving you stats and stuff to back me up, I want to make this clear that this isn't the only thing that's hurting NASCAR. I agree that I think when the playoffs or the chase was introduced in 2004, that definitely turned some fans off, and the current format with all the rounds and the win and you're in, I think that's turned other fans off as well. I think that plays a part, as does ticket prices, you know, the schedule the way it is, the types of tracks, the type of racing, the cars, the way they've developed with the Gen 5 and the Gen 6 cars. I 100% agree that they have played a part as well in the decline of NASCAR. But I want to look at the most recent years, the last couple of years, we've seen a steeper decline. And if you ask me, it's obvious as to why this decline is happening. And I don't want NASCAR fans to feel all doom and gloom for the future. I don't want NASCAR fans to think that this is something that won't ever change. It's just what's affecting the sport right now. So I want to take a look at that. So firstly, I showed you this graph a second ago, but this is a graph of the TV viewers for the Richmond International Raceway or Richmond Raceway race in the spring the last, 10 years or so. And like I said, you can see from the late 2000s into the early 2010s, it was a fairly steady, still a small drop, but a fairly steady drop. But you can see from 2016 to 2017, and it's not on here, but 2018's was even lower. There has been a steep drop the last 2 years. So why is that? What has changed from 2015, 2016 to now to really accelerate this decline? What changed? Well, how about drivers such as Jeff Gordon, Tony Stewart, Dale Earnhardt Jr., Matt Kenseth, Carl Edwards, Greg Biffle, Mark Martin, etc. Big name drivers the last several years that have retired from the Cup Series and retired from racing all around. You're looking at 2 or 3 of the top most popular drivers of the sport throughout the 2000s and throughout the 2010s that have now disappeared since 2015. Obviously, Matt Kenseth, we just heard last week, is coming back, but it seems like that's kind of a short-term solution and it's not really going to fix everything. This still is going to be an issue. Obviously, when you replace someone like Dale Earnhardt Jr. with Alex Bowman, as great as Alex Bowman is, I'm not going to diss Alex Bowman, clearly there's a decent number of fans that aren't going to stick around, at least not with that 88 car. I go to the Texas Motor Speedway race, at least one of their races every single year, and I noticed every year in years past, I would look around the crowd, 40 to 50% of fans, it felt like, had Dale Jr. merchandise on, whether it was 88, 8, DEI, it was all sorts of merchandise. Dale Earnhardt, number 3 merchandise, it was all over the place. People love Dale Earnhardt. I was at the race just a few weeks ago here in 2018, and I gotta say, I did not see very many Dale Earnhardt Jr. I still saw probably more Dale Jr. than most other drivers, but I saw a lot of Kevin Harvick that I'd never seen. I saw a lot of Kyle Busch that I'd never seen. I saw a lot of Jimmy Johnson that I'd never seen, but the Dale Jr. fans didn't turn out the way they had. So you might be thinking, well, this is obvious. Of course, when a big name driver retires, the next year, the next 2 years are gonna hurt in viewership, but there's likely gonna be an increase again a couple years later when the drivers that replace them ultimately come into their, come of age and start winning races and become really competitive. Drivers like Alex Bowman, drivers like Chase Elliott, and so on, I'll talk about more in a minute. You expect that after a couple years, those drivers will build fan bases of their own and carry the sport into the future. And that carries me into my second main point where I want to look at some stats. This is why I think the dip has been more considerable the last couple years, and that's why I think the dip will continue for possibly another couple years, and NASCAR will be very lucky if they ever see an increase again the way they did in the mid to late 90s. I want to take a look at some of the, quote-unquote NASCAR superstars from the last 20 years or so. I want to take a look at some of these veterans and look back at their first 3 years in the Cup Series, and I want to compare their statistics to the statistics of some of these young drivers that we've seen take their rides the last couple of years. And I want to compare some of these young drivers in their first 3 years versus these veteran drivers that are retiring now. Look at how they did in their first 3 years. I think we'll see something that's kind of alarming. I'll start by looking at Jeff Gordon. He came into NASCAR first full-time Cup Series season in 1993. His first 3 years in the Cup Series, 9 wins and a Cup Series championship. Tony Stewart's rookie season was 1999. His first 3 seasons, he won 12 races, and in his 4th year, he won a Cup Series championship. Jimmy Johnson's first year in the Cup Series, 2002, 14 wins in his first 3 seasons and 2 second-place finishes in points. And now those drivers, obviously all-time greats. All 3 of those drivers most people would consider among the top 10 best drivers of all time, but that's not just exclusive to those drivers. Matt Kenseth, who's great, but he's not a top 10 driver of all time, 6 wins in his first 3 Cup Series seasons and a championship in year 4. Dale Earnhardt Jr. had 7 wins in his first 3 Cup Series seasons. Carl Edwards showed up in 2005, 7 wins in his first 3 years. Even Greg Biffle, who we don't talk about that much anymore, had 9 wins in his first 3 Cup Series seasons. So there are just some examples. Those are the drivers that carried NASCAR through the 90s and through the 2000s and into 2010s during its peak years, because they came into the sport at a time when NASCAR needed new stars, and they delivered. I mean, Jimmy Johnson, 14 wins in 3 seasons, first 3 seasons. You just don't see that anymore. Fans of drivers who were retiring had these young drivers. That's why Jeff Gordon was so popular, because he showed up, dominated the 90s. He was beating Dale Earnhardt. This young guy came on the scene and was as good or better than Dale Earnhardt. Won 4 championships in the 90s and then in 2001. These young drivers got these great cars and took advantage of them and were beating the old drivers on a consistent basis. And that's why they became superstars, and that's why they became really the foundation of NASCAR from the mid-90s to the late 2000s. And that's why NASCAR is so successful, because these drivers attracted fans because they succeeded. But now I want to look at some of today's modern 2018 young guns, young drivers, hot stars of the sport who are coming up. And I want to look at some of their stats in their first few years, and you're going to see some of the just most alarming division between the stats I just read you and these upcoming stats. Let's look at them. I'll start with Kyle Larson, who's probably the best of the drivers I'm about to read off. 2014 was his rookie season. His first 3 years, he had only 1 win in the Cup Series, and last year he did get 4 wins, which was great, a breakout season for him, but he's taken a step backwards, it seems, in 2018, and even now, he's in his 5th year in the Cup Series. His best points finish is only 8th. Let's look at Ricky Stenhouse Jr., who stepped into the 17 car after winning 2 Xfinity Series championships. He stepped into the Cup Series in 2013. His first 4 Cup Series seasons, 0 wins. He did get 2 wins last year at restrictor plate tracks, but even so, his best points finish in now his first 5, this is his 6th year in the Cup Series, his best points finish is 12th. Actually, fact check me to make that 13th. Austin Dillon stepped into the 3 car in 2014. Oh my gosh, the 3 car is back. First 3 seasons in the Cup Series, 0 wins. He won a fuel mileage race last year in his 4th season, and he did win the Daytona 500 this year, but he only led the final third of a lap. So again, first 3 seasons, 0 wins for Austin Dillon. Let's look at Chase Elliott. In his 3rd full-time Cup Series season, he took over the 24 car at the time of Jeff Gordon. He was, heralded as the next great coming, the next big superstar to propel NASCAR to the next era. He's in his 3rd season. 0 wins. Now, he's run well. He's got good points finishes. His best points finish was last year, 5th, and you could have argued he should have made it to the Final 4 at Homestead. So Chase Elliott hasn't been a bust, but 0 wins. And we're 2 1/3 years into his career. 0 wins. Ryan Blaney's first full season was 2016. He's now in his 3rd year in the Cup Series. 1 win. Now, actually, I'll give him some credit because he was driving for the Wood Brothers last 2 years, and that's not a great car. So he did get a win there. I'll give Ryan Blaney some credit. That's part of why he's one of the more popular young drivers we have today. But still, he's into his 3rd year. 1 win. Compare that to all those old drivers I was talking about earlier. Not even close. Daniel Suarez, Eric Jones, I'm not going to go into them too much. They're only in their second years, but 0 wins, and neither of them even made the playoffs last year. They let 16 cars in the playoffs. Neither of them even made it last year. And right now, they're both kind of on the bubble, if even. And you look at some of the other ones. William Byron, Alex Bowman, Bubba Wallace. I know that a lot of those guys in their first years, Alex Bowman, this is his first year in really good equipment, but they don't have any wins yet, and they've honestly, I don't know if any of them are even in the top 10 in points. In fact, no, none of them are in the top 10 in points right now that I just named. So let's take a look at that for a second. Look at these veteran drivers that I talked about, the drivers that have been superstars for the last 20, 25 years. Look at how they did in their first 3 years. Look at all those wins, and a couple of them on there won championships in their 4th season and all that. Versus these young drivers, a couple wins here and there. I know Larson had 4 wins, but that was in his 4th year, and he doesn't look to be that good this year, so he's taking a step backwards. It's just night and day looking at these two. So the problem NASCAR has in 2018 is fans are being forced to root for these new replacement drivers, and they're just not getting the job done. We're 10 races into this season. Kyle Busch has 3 wins. Kevin Harvick has 3 wins. Clint Bowyer hadn't won a race in like 5 years, and now he's got a win because he's got no competition. Fans are being forced to root for these young drivers, and because a lot of them are struggling and really not even close to what their predecessors were, a lot of fans are abandoning them, and as a result, some number of those fans are abandoning the sport as a whole, and it's just inevitable. I mean, yeah, you just look at this season. Like I said, Clint Bowyer, Kevin Harvick made that funny tweet a couple weeks ago about how the average age of winners to that point was like in their late 30s. I mean, you got Ryan Blaney in 8th in points right now. 8th in points is the highest running young driver, and he's driving for Team Penske, one of the top teams in the sport. I mean, Matt Kenseth is coming back to replace one of these young drivers that had a lot of hype behind him several years ago. Matt Kenseth's coming out of retirement because Roush Fenway Racing realized that that young driver wasn't getting it done. NASCAR always airs those commercials on Sunday, the black and white ones with like, the young blood ready to take out the old. That's false advertising, NASCAR. Because when I tune in on Sunday, I see veterans Kevin Harvick and Martin Truex Jr. and Kyle Busch leading, and I see these young drivers struggling to stay on the lead lap most of the time. NASCAR's declining ratings the last couple of years are simple. Compare it to baseball. If the New York Yankees just suddenly disappeared from baseball next season, just out of nowhere, the Yankees were not playing, yeah, baseball's ratings would take a major hit. Now, you know, NASCAR's had Jeff Gordon, Dale Jr., Tony Stewart, all of them leave in this amount of time. Imagine if the New York Yankees, Boston Red Sox, Chicago Cubs, and LA Dodgers all left baseball in 1 year. Yeah, ratings would suck for baseball. So that's what's happening to NASCAR right now. And I think, like I said at the beginning of this long video, I talked about how, sure, the schedule, the playoffs, the cars, the way they drive, that all contributes to it. But more than anything, the reason NASCAR's ratings and views have dipped so much the last couple of years is because of the loss of major successful superstars, and their replacements have not lived up to any of the hype to this point. And it's causing a lot of fans to just abandon them and kind of just give up on them because they got no one to root for anymore, because these drivers they're trying to root for just aren't very good yet. And I say yet because there is still hope that down the line here, the next couple of years, a few of these drivers like Blaney, like Elliott, like Jones, like Larson will emerge and be real championship contenders. But until that happens on a regular basis, we're going to be stuck seeing the Kevin Harvick and Kyle Busch show week in, week out this whole season because they have nobody close to their level right now. These veteran drivers have nobody close to their level. When you get rid of Dale Jr., Jeff Gordon, Matt Kenseth, Tony Stewart, Carl Edwards, Greg Biffle, those are 5 or 6 championship playoff drivers that you get rid of. Guys like Harvick, you know, and Kyle Busch, Martin Truex, they're just going to have an easier time. NASCAR needs 2004 Dale Jr. or like mid-90s Jeff Gordon to come back if they wanted to ever get back to the size and the scope that they once were. But obviously that's never going to happen. So NASCAR's just got to kind of continue to promote these young drivers, but in moderation, because it's unfair to put that much hype behind them. And actually, I want to get into that for a second, because I don't mean to say these young drivers are bad. When I show you those stats, how they have 0 or 1 or very few wins in their first few seasons, it's unfair for us as fans or for me to critique them for that. Like, because it's difficult to come to the Cup Series when you have very few years of experience versus these guys like Harvick and Johnson and Busch who have 10, 20 years of experience on you. It's so hard to come in and immediately be better than them. It's very difficult, and it's unfair for us to put those expectations on them. Unfortunately, NASCAR put some of those expectations on them by running these major ad campaigns, but NASCAR's just doing what they have to do to maintain views, because when Dale Jr. leaves, you need to give fans a reason to root for Alex Bowman or Chase Elliott or one of these other guys, or else those fans are just going to leave. So I can't fault NASCAR either. It's just a bad overall circumstance for these young drivers to come into the sport. They come in with so much hype behind them. Suarez, the first Mexican-born driver in the Cup Series. Bubba Wallace, first African-American driver in a long time. You have all these storylines, these big stories behind these drivers to try and draw in fans for them, but the results just aren't there on the racetrack. And it's unfair of us to critique them for that, because I think given how much experience these drivers have, a lot of them have done a pretty decent job. But when I compare them to Tony Stewart, to Jeff Gordon, to Matt Kenseth, and so on, yeah, it doesn't live up. But it's unfair for us to assume these drivers are going to all be top 10s all times like Gordon and Stewart and whatnot are. You know, you can't expect every driver to be the next Jeff Gordon. Jeff Gordons don't just come around every 5 years. But that being said, I just wanted to make this video. I don't have a solution. There's no real solution. You know, the only solution is, hey, Chase Elliott wins 5 races and goes win the championships this year. That would help. But since that's, you know, unlikely to happen, I think NASCAR fans, I just want NASCAR fans to be aware that this is happening, because I think it's subconsciously happening. I'm a huge Matt Kenseth fan. When he, you know, announced his retirement last season, I've been trying to root for Eric Jones, and it hasn't been as fun because Eric Jones is not as good as Matt Kenseth, at least not yet. I'm excited Matt's coming back. That gives me my guy to root for again, even though he's in lousy equipment. So I just know if I'm feeling this way about Matt Kenseth, I know there's tons of Dale Jr., tons of Jeff Gordon fans out there. I know they have to be feeling it too, because I'm sure a lot of them moved on to William Byron or Chase Elliott or Alex Bowman, and those drivers have disappointed for the most part so far, at least compared to, you know, the drivers they replaced. So I just want to make this video to let NASCAR fans know that I'm thinking about you, that to know that this is, I think, a normal way to be reacting as fans, and I think it's nothing to panic over when we see these dips in ratings. I mean, I think the steady dip that I showed, I'll put up this graphic, this Richmond graphic again, that steady dip you see from, you know, late 2000s to 2013, 2014, that can be addressed by some of those other issues I talked about. But I think as far as these driver issues, it's unfair to look at the 2017, 2018 TV ratings and stuff and act like, oh, NASCAR's never coming back. It's definitely taken a big hit because of these old veteran champion drivers leaving, but that's not insurmountable. They can get those ratings back in the next few years if drivers like Larson and Chase Elliott and Suarez and Jones and so on become more successful. I love Kyle Busch, I love Kevin Harvick, I love Jimmy Johnson, but they can't win forever. Jimmy's going to retire in the next year or two. We know it's coming. That's another really popular driver that NASCAR is going to have to brace for impact when he leaves. And at that point, they need Byron, they need Bowman, they need Bubba. They need these killer bees, these young rookies. They need them to come up and start to actually replace these veterans. That will help them get those views back. They'll manage that gap. That other dip, I think, you know, you can make a case that needs to be, you know, the playoff format, the cars themselves, those need to be changed to fix that. That I completely agree with. But if you're going to sit here and act like NASCAR is dead, it's completely dead. Look at 2018 ratings. It's dead, not coming back. It's put a lid on, bury them. They're gone. I think that's a little bit of an exaggerate. That's a little quick. You're a little quick on the trigger there. I don't know if I'd go that far. So anyway, this is a long episode. It's a long episode, but I wanted to make this episode because I wanted to give my opinion out there definitively. I know people are still going to ask me my opinion, and I'll just point them to this video and say, hey, can you sit through, I don't know, how long is it going to be, 20 minutes or so of me talking? We'll see if they can. But anyway, thank you guys so much for sitting through this. Let me know if you agree or disagree in the comments below. You can sponsor the show like these two fine people right here. Shout out Michael Harrison, official sponsor of Out of the Groove. You can be an official sponsor just like these people. If you look in the description, there's options down there, which is would be really awesome, and I really appreciate that. New episodes will come out later this week. I'll talk about the upcoming race this weekend at, where are we going, Dover. Talk about that. If you're new to the channel, I do this multiple times a week, talk about racing. Typically it's more about what's going on a week-to-week basis, not so much a grand scale like this, but sometimes I'll make videos like this. Anyways, thanks everyone for watching. I'll see you later this week. Have a good one.